Well, hello, Christ Community Church. Pastor Tommy here with our daily devotional as we're working our way through Holy Week in preparation for Good Friday and for Easter. I know that this week has already turned out to be a difficult week for our church family, given some circumstances in our body. And so just want to take the time to encourage you to be in prayer for our church family. I also want to invite you, as many of you know, we are planning to do a Zoom call on Easter Sunday to just connect. But also what I want to invite you to do is we're going to actually do a Zoom call sooner than that, Thursday night, this Thursday, which is tomorrow night, April 9th at 6:30. We're going to be doing a Zoom call, giving us an opportunity to pray together. I think this is a time in which we need to come together and be in prayer as a body, and this is a great opportunity for us to connect as well. So we're going to have a prayer gathering over Zoom. In the email that was sent with this video, I'll have a link to the Zoom prayer, how you can access the Zoom meeting. If for whatever reason you did not receive this email, or if you're watching this on YouTube and you would like to be included in this prayer meeting, please just email me and I'd be happy to send you the link to the Zoom meeting. And we'd love to have as many people as we can be a part of that meeting, and we can pray together for our church and specifically for protection during this coronavirus season. So I just want to invite you to that, and just an opportunity for us to encourage each other and to come to the Lord in prayer and to seek Him during this time. Our devotion for this day comes from John chapter 13. Earlier in John chapter 13, Jesus does the incredibly humble act of washing His disciples' feet, which is actually what we'll be talking about tomorrow and Monday, Thursday. But today, in our text, we are entered into the situation in which Jesus and His disciples are in the upper room, and they are eating together, having presumably the Passover meal. And we learn in our text that after Jesus washes their feet and after teaching them, Jesus was troubled in His spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom He spoke. One of His disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom He was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to Him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when He had dipped the morsel, He gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after He had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you are going to do, do quickly." Now, no one at the table knew why He said this to him. Some thought because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, He immediately went out, and it was night. When He had gone out, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in Him. If God is glorified in Him, God will also glorify Him in Himself and glorify Him at once." Well, as we read this passage, and as I look at this passage this morning, what stands out to me is just how dark of a passage it is. We begin by hearing that Jesus is troubled in spirit, that there's something going on in Jesus' heart and soul that is troubling Him. And we soon learn that He's troubled because one of His disciples will betray Him. Of course, He has known this throughout His ministry, but as the hour grows near, He is troubled in His spirit. And then after he declares this to his disciples are confused and want to know who it is. And so basically, Peter asks the disciple who Jesus loves, who's presumably the Apostle John writing this, to ask Jesus, because he was close to Jesus, who it was. And so John asks Jesus, and Jesus demonstrates who it is by dipping bread into the cup and giving it to Judas Iscariot. And then we have this picture in which when Judas gets the bread, Satan himself enters into him. It's a vivid picture and a very dark image of him being literally possessed by Satan. Beforehand, we read about how Judas is influenced by Satan, that Satan prompts Judas to do things, but now Satan himself has entered Judas and presumably is controlling Judas's actions from here on out. And it's in this moment that Jesus says to him, which I don't know if he's talking to Judas or if he's talking to Satan himself. He says, whatever you're going to do quickly. Do it quickly. And then Judas begins his treachery, running out of the room, and presumably going to begin his betrayal of Jesus. And John kind of concludes this by adding the detail that it was night. It was night, which the writer John will often use. He intentionally uses the imagery of night to display a deeper darkness. There's a spiritual darkness in this passage. But then what happens next is interesting. In verse 31, it says that when Judas had gone out, Jesus says, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and glorify him at once." Yesterday we talked about how the cross glorifies God, how God is glorified in Jesus' death, namely that through Jesus' death, God's grace is clearly seen. And so what's remarkable to me is that in the midst of this passage that is so dark, that is filled with just dreary imagery, and especially horrific imagery of Satan entering Judas and Judas beginning his betrayal of Jesus, there's a sense in which even in the midst of all that, God is glorified and God will be glorified. That in the present darkness, God is at work, God is up to something, and what he is up to glorifying himself, glorifying Christ. Even in the midst of the darkness, God is working. God is up to something. God is doing something. It reminds me of, a pretty famous passage that you're probably familiar with, Jeremiah 29:11, right? That for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future, right? And Jeremiah is promising this, or God is speaking through the prophet Jeremiah to the nation of Israel. But what a lot of people miss in this passage is that when Jeremiah is prophesying this, Israel is in captivity. Israel, the land of, or really the nation of Judah, is in Babylon. They're in captivity. And so when God is saying that he has plans for them, they're in darkness. But God's up to something. God's doing something. And he says later on in verse 12 that when you will call upon me and come and pray to me, I will hear you. In the midst of your darkness, when you pray to me, I will hear you. You will seek me, verse 13, and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. And then he goes on to promise that eventually he's going to restore the fortunes. He's going to gather the nation. He's going to restore Israel and Judah back to what they were originally intended to be. And so all this is to be said that, man, as we look at Holy Week and as we venture with the darkness that Jesus is in this passage, and as we kind of compare that to maybe the darkness that we're in right now, we can have hope that in all of this, God will be glorified. And that God is up to something, and that he knows the plans that he has for us. That he's doing something, that God is for you. God cares about you. But God also cares about his glory, and God is working towards his glory. And so that even when we can't make sense of it all, we can know that God is up to something. God is doing something amazing in it all. So as we look towards the cross, and we look towards really what the tragedy of the cross and the horror of the cross, even in that darkness, God is doing something. He's up to something, even if we don't know what it is, and even if we can't see it clearly. Love you, church family. Continue to stay in touch. I'll continue to stay in touch. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. God bless.